for question period. The Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. The government still claims they balance the books, but all with typical Liberal math. You know, Mr. Speaker, something doesn't...
Order, please. That's not helpful when I'm trying to get attention for your leader. Thank you. Please put your question.
But all with typical Liberal math, something doesn't add up. What do you get when you add in $1.8 billion from double-counted cap-and-trade money? You have $500 million in pension assets, despite the Auditor General's advice not to count it. $1.5 billion in double-counted federal transfer funds, $450 million in land transfer taxes, and lastly, $1 billion from the fire sale of Hydro. And what do you get, Mr. Speaker, when you add that all together? It's a $5 billion operational deficit funded through cash grabs.
I'm going to ask the member from Nepean Carleton to withdraw, and I've made it clear I don't want that set. Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, it is a $5 billion operational deficit through cash grabs, pension assets, and one-time and unusual revenue. Will the Premier come clean and admit to the House the budget is not balanced?
Thank you. Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to say that this is the first balanced budget in Ontario for nearly a decade, Mr. Speaker. And we worked very hard to eliminate the deficit, Mr. Speaker. We knew that that was critical, and our economy is in a very strong position in Ontario. We are leading the country, Mr. Speaker, in economic growth, but the reality is that people are still anxious, and so the foundation of a balanced budget actually gives us the opportunity to make investments that are needed in the province. So, Mr. Speaker, a prime example of that is OHIP Plus, which allows us to invest in the people of this province and allows children and youth in this province as of January 2018 to have free medication, Mr. Speaker, because we know that if we can make that investment and kids and young people can get access early to the medication that they need, they will be healthier in the long term, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, you know what else doesn't add up? The fact that the Wynne Liberals are adding another $10 billion of debt. They say they have a balanced budget. But another reason the Liberals claim they have a balanced budget is because they're simply hiding debt elsewhere. If this budget was truly balanced, we wouldn't be adding debt left, right, and centre. But the Wynne Liberals are adding $10 billion worth of debt to the most indebted province in the world. We owe more than any province or state, and it's about to get worse. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier explain why we're adding so much debt this year, $10 billion, if it's actually a balanced budget?
Mr. Speaker, well, I absolutely understand that the Leader of the Opposition has no interest and no plan to make capital investment in this province, Mr. Speaker. No interest in it, and no apparent understanding that without investment in capital, without investment in transit, Mr. Speaker, in roads and bridges across the province, you know, he was at the City of Toronto today, Mr. Speaker, talking about the City of Toronto.
Minister of Agriculture, come to order.
One commitment to invest 1 cent in transit in the City of Toronto, Mr. Speaker. We have billions of dollars that's being invested in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Kitchener-Waterloo, Mr. Speaker, in Hamilton, around the province, because we know that those investments are critical to the economic viability and growth of those communities and the province overall. We are proud of our balanced budget, Mr. Speaker, first one in a decade in Ontario, and it allows us to have a foundation upon which to invest.
Thank you. Stop the clock, please. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. You know, this myth of a balanced budget didn't trick everyone, didn't confuse everyone. Just look what Kelly McParlin had to say in the National Post. I quote in this article, "The budget claims to be balanced even though debt will rise another $26.4 billion this fiscal year. Debt servicing costs will again eat up $1 billion a month." He added, I quote, "Billions of dollars in expenditures for capital projects are kept off book. Billions more in borrowing shoved into the future. One-time asset sales like Hydro One sell-offs are used to make the numbers look better than they are. And that's from the National Post. Mr. Speaker, clearly this budget is not balanced. And my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is playing with the numbers. Is fudging the numbers really worth hurting the long-term future of Ontario?
I'm on the edge with that, please. Just keep it away from there. Premier.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear. We balanced the budget this year, next year, and the year after that. This is coming from a party who increased debt by 53% when they were in power as a province during the good times, and this member himself, he voted in the largest deficit in our country's history, $55 billion, Mr. Speaker, and he doubled debt during the time that he was there. Mr. Speaker, I'll read a quote from an independent source, a rating agency. They said the following: the government has, to its credit, outperformed its targets each year. Efforts to constrain wages and limit spending growth in key program areas kept the plan on track, initially while the province was benefiting from strong economic growth, and more recently, one-off measures, Mr. Speaker. That's the DBRS. It goes on to say the net debt to GDP ratio is seen falling for a third straight year at 37.5% in 17-16. Ontario aims to ease a GDP ratio down to 35%.